In the spring of 1842, Alabama's roads turned soft and swollen beneath sudden rains. The clay bled red down the ridges, soaking fields and seeping beneath cabin doors. In the deep country west of Wilcox County, where no official roads ran and no boundary stones had ever held their place, a pair of twins was born in a house no one remembered building. The cabin sat crooked at the edge of the pines, near a bend in the creek that dried to cracked stone each August and flooded, like judgment in April. It wasn't on any surveyor. They came with the thunder, she said, hands still raw from scrubbing, not a pulse between them, still as clay. I turned to fetch the sheet, and when I looked again, they were breathing, quiet, even, like nothing happened at all. Susanna Fletch had been a widow just shy of a year. Her husband, Thomas, was a cooper by trade, lost to fever and buried without a box. She'd grown thin since then, silent and dried, the kind of woman people offered charity to but did not embrace. When pressed for details, the hour of labor, how long the birth took, what she'd named them, Susanna only shook her head. They weren't born, she said. The storm brought them. She would not name them. Said naming was for what you claimed, and these boys did not belong to her. When the preacher came, offering baptism and scripture, she would not even open the door. They'll choose their names, she whispered through the slats, if they stay. Over the following weeks, neighbors tried their best. Jars of preserved peaches were left on the porch, folded linens, even a toy wooden horse, carved from cedar. None were taken. No one was thanked. Susanna came to the well only after dusk, the boys in her arms, one in each crook, their faces turned inward to her collarbone, eyes closed. Not once did anyone hear them cry. When asked about the birth again, Susanna turned her gaze toward the ridge, where the pines grew thick in a strange ring, perfectly round. They don't cry, she murmured. They only watch. The children in town, those old enough to notice such things, began avoiding the path near the creek. They said the twins were always watching. From the trees, from behind the linens Susanna hung to dry, even when no one moved them. It was the schoolmaster, Jonas Kell, who tried to do right by them. He believed every child deserved letters, so he walked the muddy trail with a primer and a slate tucked under his arm. He found the cabin door unlatched, swinging open slow. Inside, the fire had long since burned to coals. There, by the hearth, sat the twins, no more than 4 months old, yet upright, their hands folded in their laps like tiny men waiting to be called. Jonas stood frozen in the doorway, unable to speak. The twins turned toward him in perfect unison, heads tilting with mechanical grace. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. The air in the cabin had grown thick, like it was full of waiting breath. The room didn't feel empty. By early May, the land had dried, but unease lingered heavier than the humidity. Crops rose slow. Dogs refused to cross near the Fletch cabin, and something, though no one could name, what hung in the air like spoiled milk beneath sun. The twins were growing, but not in any way the town understood. No one could say exactly how much time had passed between sightings, only that they always looked the same. Pale hair that never darkened, eyes that didn't seem to change, faces as smooth and uncreased as washed porcelain. To calm, to still. Neighbors claimed they had never seen them blink. Susanna Fletch, once a woman seen at church in a clean apron and a shawl tied under her chin, had gone nearly feral. She spoke little, ate less, and though she kept to herself, she began hanging things from the porch rail each morning, not clothes, but long, pale linens, sheets, tablecloths, shrouds, bleached fabric that fluttered even on windless days. Behind them, the twins would stand, motionless silhouettes, identical in posture, expression. Ruthie wasn't yet 9 when she told her mother, "They don't have shadows, Mama. The boys, I saw 'em in the orchard behind the house. Sun was out, they had none." That orchard, just behind the rise, was where the preacher's wife began hanging salt at her windowsills. Quietly, shamefully, she claimed it was for mice. But mice don't speak in dreams. She'd begun to wake with a cold ache in her breast, always just before dawn. A sharp, quiet pain, like something hollow trying to fill. It came only when she thought too long about those boys, about how no one had witnessed their birth, only appeared the next morning to find the chimney smoking and the widow's window open. They had never been. The omission began to fester in the community, not as a scandal, but as something older and deeper than that, like a story half remembered, but never forgotten, something from before the land had names. Some suggested quietly that Susanna had never truly carried them, that perhaps grief had done what nature could not. Others said nothing at all, just watched the frost return early that year, curling the edges of the leaves into sharp bone white shells. It was then that the cabin stopped smoking, until one afternoon, when Willard Pike returned. He claimed to have forgotten a satchel from his last visit, though truthfully, most knew he had come to settle something quiet in his chest. Pride, maybe, or doubt. He knocked twice. No answer. Turning to leave, he heard a sound, not a voice exactly, but a kind of low, thread-thin humming. It rose and fell like breath caught in a throat. He stepped back toward the rail, lifting one edge of the cloth. And there they stood, the boys, identical, unmoving, eyes wide and too dark in the shadows. Their mouths were moving, not open, not closed, just shifting slowly, shaping something silent. Willard dropped his satchel where he stood. He turned and fled. Children were told not to ask questions about the twins, and when they did, their parents shushed them without reason. Stories slipped from mouths in half-whisper, straighted, like contraband at washing rocks or while snapping beans on back porches. They stand behind the house for hours, one woman muttered. Just stand, hands behind their backs, watching the woods. Another swore she heard their voices through her kitchen wall one night, murmuring in some dry, bubbling tongue. She pressed her ear to the floorboards, hoping to catch a word. But what she heard turned, suddenly becoming a watery gurgle, like something rising beneath bath water, just out of reach. Even the preacher's wife, once the most charitable woman in the county, confessed to a sickness in her chest whenever she passed their gate. She said it sharpened when she thought too long about the details, the ones that were never truly confirmed. Had the twins been born, or had they simply appeared? There were no birth records, no baptismal dates, no cries heard the night of the storm, just the rising smoke of a fire that hadn't gone out since. The unease was no longer rumor, it was routine. People crossed the road without realizing they'd done it. Dinners were eaten early, curtains drawn tighter. By the first frost, the land had begun to bend under the weight of something unspoken. The creek froze to glass along the banks. Crows moved on, dogs grew quiet. Even the cane fields, usually whispering in wind, fell silent. And yet, Susanna Fletch took to hanging linens earlier each morning. Always pale, always clean, always fluttering when no breeze stirred the trees. The twins stood behind them like pressed leaves flattened against the cloth, unmoving, unshaped by time. It was said that if you passed by in just the right light, you could see their eyes through the fabric open wide, unblinking, not curious but waiting. One late afternoon, just before the harvest moon, a farmer spotted them at the edge of the woods. The sun was sinking behind the ridge, and the trees cast long, sharp shadows across the yard. He paused in his cart, hay creaking beneath him. The twins were crouched by the root cellar. Their hands were sunk deep into the frozen ground, wrist deep though. No spade could have cracked the dirt that hard. The farmer called out, not out of bravery, but habit, some old southern reflex to greet a child, even a strange one. They did not look up. Instead, they began to hum, low, rhythmic, slow as blood dripping from a bucket. It wasn't a tune. It was more like something imitating song, something that had learned how to sing but not why. The sound lifted the hair on his arms. He rode on, faster than he meant to. The next morning, he found a bundle on his porch. It was wrapped in muslin, no note, just a lump no bigger than a hen's egg. Inside was a clump of damp earth, and a single baby tooth, still pink at the root. He didn't show his wife, didn't say a word. Then one evening, just as the sun slid behind the pines, Susanna Fletch was seen again. She came walking up the chapel path. Each boy held one of her hands. Witnesses said she looked thinner than ever, her face drawn tight over sharp bones, eyes sunk deep as if sleep had long since left her. Her lips were cracked, her gait stiff, but her steps did not falter. The twins looked unchanged, same pale hair, same delicate wrists, same stillness. They didn't look up when the chapel bell rang. They didn't flinch when the preacher stepped outside, blinking into the dusk. They walked with her, silent and unhurried, as though returning to a place they had never truly left. I've come for baptism, Susanna announced. Her voice was hoarse and used like it hadn't passed her lips in weeks. The preacher, startled but moved, nodded with quiet relief. Whatever darkness had gathered around the Fletch home, perhaps this was its loosening. Perhaps the weight would lift. He led them inside. The chapel was empty, no service that evening. Just the smell of all lamps and old pine pews. The font stood waiting, silver basin half filled with fresh water. He stepped forward, lifted the ewer with both hands. Then something happened. The twins turned, not to him, to each other. They locked eyes, blue glass to blue glass, and something passed between them. Not speech, not movement, just a stillness so total it felt louder than thunder. The preacher froze, "You're mid-pour." Then they smiled, slowly, identically, their lips peeled back, even and unnatural. The smile went wide, too wide, and the teeth it revealed were not the teeth of children, not spaced, not rounded, but flat, uniform, to many. The preacher blinked, and the water in the basin turned gray. Not clouded, not dirty, gray, like ash dissolved in rain. He stepped back, set the ewer down carefully, said nothing. He never touched them. Susanna said no more. She turned without another word and walked back down the aisle, her sons behind her. As they passed through the doors, the wind picked up for the first time in days. Leaves lifted off the ground and scattered like warnings. That was the last time Susanna Fletch was seen. The cabin, from that moment on, remained shuttered. The chimney stayed cold. The linens that once fluttered now yellowed with time. No fresh cloths were hung. No fire was lit. No smoke curled from the stone. But the boys, they were seen more often than ever. Just before dawn, drifting through the yard, standing at the edge of the tree line, hands by their sides, faces lifted toward the sky as if waiting for the sun to break a promise. Once, a boy herding goats near the slope said he saw them crouched in the dirt again, not digging this time planting. Though with what, he couldn't say. When he drew near, the twins stood. No words, just their eyes, wide and unblinking. And that smile. It came heavy, wet, and thick coating the fields before the last corn had been brought in. The ground hardened beneath its weight. Hearth fires were lit long before dusk. But even the warmest homes in town felt colder that week, as though something old had stirred beneath the frost and breathed out over the land. The twins were seen again at twilight, standing beneath the blackened trees. This time, a farmer's son Eli Trent, a boy of just 12, claimed he watched them press their hands into the frozen soil and leave them there, wrist deep, still, for nearly an hour. When he finally called out, they did not flinch. Instead, they began to hum, low, syncopated, like a lullaby heard through walls too thick to understand. Eli ran all the way home. He said nothing to his father. But the next morning, there was something waiting on the porch. A bundle, small and damp, wrapped in unbleached muslin. Inside, a child's tooth. White, wet at the root, still warm. The Trents burned it immediately. But that night, it returned. On the mantel, in a boot, then in the cradle beside Eli's bed. No one in the family slept. Lamps were kept burning. Psalms whispered. And yet, each morning, the tooth was found again. By now, something had shifted in how the town spoke of the boys. It was no longer where they had come from but what they might be owed. What was their price? What was the cost of their arrival? The preacher tried to organize a meeting. Quietly, respectfully, he did not name the children. Aloud only spoke of a presence, of an imbalance. We must face it, he said, before it names us. But when the time came, the chapel was already full. Every pew occupied. The air still. The lanterns lit. No one remembered walking in. They simply sat, men, women, children, silent and waiting. Hands folded, eyes open but distant. And then the bell began to toll. No hand pulled the rope. It simply rang deep and solemn, shaking the rafters, rattling old glass in its frames. Outside, the twins stood on the chapel steps, faces lifted to the steeple. Their mouths moved with the bell's rhythm, soundless but exact. The preacher's wife, standing just inside the doorway, gasped and clutched her chest. She would later claim she saw something crawling beneath their skin, like breath caught in the wrong body, trying to escape through their bones. The final toll echoed like a knell through the hills. And then darkness. Every lamp, every candle, guttered out at once. The silence that followed was total. Not even breath stirred. And in that hush, a word was heard. But what it was, no one could agree. Some said it was owed. Others swore it was returned. But the old widow, Alma Bree, the one who had buried 3 children, and spoke little since, shook her head. No word at all, she whispered. Not a name, just a sound, soft and wet, like something moving inside a cradle left too long untouched. Snow clung to it even when the rest of the county thawed. The creek lay frozen in silence. Birds flew wide around its perimeter, and the cabin, once alive with rumor and smoke, now stood like a shadow pinned beneath the sky. No footsteps marked the drifts. No smoke rose from the chimney. Yet each dawn, those who dared to glance uphill swore they saw the twins, pressed behind the frost-caked window, their foreheads against the glass, watching. They never moved. They never blinked. But somehow, it always felt like they had just arrived. It was on one such morning, a bleak, sharp-ski day just after the solstice, that a traveling priest passed through on his way to Montgomery. He was young, stern-faced, unaware, when he heard the stories at the inn that night, whispers of the twins, the baptism, the bell. He scoffed, called it superstition brewed from cold and hunger. Still, before leaving, he walked up the ridge and left something at their gate, a bundle of candles, wrapped in cloth. No child should freeze in December, he told the innkeeper. He did not make it past the first mile beyond the ridge. His horse returned at dusk, reins severed clean as if by shears. No saddlebag, no rider. Just a dark, greasy smear on the saddle leather shaped like a child's hand. Small and perfect. A search party was formed the next morning. What they found was worse than nothing. No body, no tracks, only the bundle of candles now, unwrapped, arranged in a perfect circle on the frozen ground outside the cabin door. Each wick was lit. No match had been struck, and yet the flames burned steady. Even as the wind rose and snow came down in thick curtains, no one stepped closer. No one spoke. For 3 nights, the flames continued to burn unmoving, untouched, hallowing the house like a silent ritual. And then came the humming. Those who passed by claimed to hear it low, harmonic, never rising above a whisper. 2 voices, always in unison. Soft, patient, as if waiting for something or someone to answer. By New Year's Eve, not a single home near the ridge was without a candle burning in every room. Mothers swaddled their children tighter. Fathers nailed shut windows. Salt was poured in thresholds. Psalms were spoken not for faith, but for protection. But nothing kept the sound out entirely. The humming continued, sometimes just beyond the wall, other times behind the mirror, or from beneath the bed where dust had gathered like memory. And always, always, it came in pairs. 2 notes, 2 pitches, not broken like glass, but bent subtly, quietly, until the world no longer sat square on its frame. People spoke in lowered voices. Children slept with salt in their pockets. And the preacher no longer looked toward the ridge when he spoke of grace. He kept the chapel door locked at night now. Didn't say why. Just tightened the bolts himself, fingers trembling as if the very act of turning the key scratched something inside him. He stopped mentioning Susanna Fletch. He stopped mentioning God, unless prompted. He focused on scripture that spoke of endurance, testing, wilderness. It was during this bleak hush, just after Ash Wednesday, that he gathered the congregation to bless the town's youngest. Mothers came, clutching swaddled babes. Fathers followed, silent, holding psalm books like weapons. Candles burned low in sconces. The air inside the chapel was thick with oil and damp wool. The hymn began, soft, trembling, uncertain. Then, the back door creaked open. No wind moved it, no hand touched it, yet it swung wide all the same. And there they stood, the twins, their cheeks pink from the cold, pale hair damp, clothes dusted with fresh snow. Their eyes didn't roam, their mouths didn't move. They simply stood at the threshold, gazing forward with a kind of calm that made even the bravest clutch tighter to their children. No one moved. The preacher's throat bobbed. His lips cracked as he raised a trembling hand, beckoning them in. They did not obey. They looked upward instead, toward the rafters, where the bell rope had once hung. Together, perfectly in sync, they opened their mouths. And though no sound came, every infant in the chapel screamed. A sudden, piercing wail, thin and sharp as splintered glass. The hymn collapsed. The fathers dropped their books. The mothers held their children like shields. And all the while, the twins simply stared, mouths open, soundless, as if casting a silent net over the room. When they turned to leave, it was as if the breath returned to the building all at once. The preacher collapsed into the pulpit chair. The babies quieted, but not fully. They whimpered for hours, refusing sleep, staring always toward the back wall as if something waited behind it. The next morning, the twins' footprints were still visible in the snow outside the chapel. Unmelted, preserved, the imprints were impossibly deep, each heel and toe perfectly shaped in ice, as if pressed not by flesh, but by something older, something heavier than children had any right to be. Parents warned their children not to go near, but one did. Cyrus Bell, 6 years old, barefoot, too young to fear what the others felt but could not name. He returned before noon, silent. In his hands, he carried something clutched tight, a small lock of pale hair tied in red thread. When his mother tried to take it, he pressed it to his chest and wept. When his father leaned over him, he thought for a moment the boy was still asleep. Then he noticed the wrist. A faint red line circled it, too perfect for a bruise, too shallow for rope burn. Like something had been tied there. Like something still was, invisibly. The doctor was summoned. He arrived in a hurry, half-dressed, still buttoning his coat. He examined the child, pressed for fever, checked the tongue, opened the lids. There was no injury, no illness, no reason at all for the boy not to wake. But he didn't. Not when his mother called. Not when his father shook him. Not even when the preacher laid a trembling hand on his chest and whispered the oldest prayer. No one meant to guide the soul home. Cyrus didn't stir. He breathed, faint and slow, but his body would not rise. And though no sound came from his mouth, the family swore they still heard the humming, not with their ears but in the walls, in the floorboards, in the air itself. That night, the Bell family slept in shifts. A candle was kept burning at each corner of the house. The mirrors were covered. Salt poured in a circle around Cyrus's bed. Still, Just after midnight, his mother woke to find the bedroom door ajar. Though no draft had moved, and Cyrus was gone, they found him in the parlor, standing barefoot, eyes open, facing the fireplace. Not blinking, not crying, just watching. On the floor before him lay the red thread, looped, knotted, perfect. When they touched him, he turned to them slowly, eyes wide with a distant calm, and began to hum. A different song this time, one none of them recognized. The tune dipped in ways that felt intentional, as if the melody was tracing something beyond music, some pattern not meant for human memory. The father tried to cover the boy's mouth. The song did not stop. It simply moved into the floorboards, into the walls, into the breath between each heartbeat. By morning, the humming was gone. Cyrus collapsed into sleep, deep, still, and when he woke, he did not speak. He did not eat. He did not blink more than once every few minutes. But he was alive. Sort of. That same day, 3 other families reported strange dreams. Cradles swinging on trees, knots tightening on their own. Children speaking in their sleep, mouths unmoving, but teeth clicking in time. A farmer found his cow bellowing at an empty crib in the barn, one that hadn't been used in 20 years. Beneath it lay a single handprint in the dust, small, unmistakable. That evening, the preacher stood before his congregation and tried to give a sermon. His voice faltered halfway through. He looked down at the pulpit. There, just above the grain, something had been scratched into the wood, 2 perfect circles, joined at the edge, interlocked like mirrored eyes. He did not finish his sermon. Instead, he closed his book and told them to go home and light every lamp they had, not just in the dirt, but in the air, in the way shadows clung to the trees, in the color of the sky when you looked too long in their direction. Something lingered in that place, something that had never warmed. Yet the signs of spring came early in town. Animals birthing before their time, foals and calves, slick with blood and breathless. No matter how quickly the midwives moved, or how many fires were stoked in the birthing stalls, the people began whispering of omens again. Not curses, not demons, but debts, as if something long forgotten had stirred beneath the frost and begun to collect. On the 3rd Sunday, the preacher ventured to the ridge. He did not bring his book. He did not bring prayers. He brought questions. The path to the cabin was overgrown, though no new growth could be seen. Just vines that seemed older than the trees themselves, curling around branches like nooses. When he reached the yard, he paused. No footprints, no voices, just stillness. The door stood half ajar, as if it had been waiting. He stepped inside. The hearth was cold, dust hung in the air like suspended breath, and the twins were there seated at the table, side by side, unmoving, each with a hand resting flat against the wood, their eyes fixed on something he could not see. Between them sat a bowl, porcelain, cracked, filled with water. The surface did not ripple, not even when he spoke. "Where is your mother?" he asked. They didn't blink. They didn't breathe. They simply reached both at once and placed their palms against the water. It changed, not in color, in depth. It seemed to stretch downward, impossibly deep. The preacher stared into it and saw not his reflection but a cradle, white, rocking, empty. Then something shifted in the water, just beneath its surface, like fingertips brushing against glass from below. The preacher staggered back. His heart pounded, his throat burned. He whispered a benediction he hadn't used since his first year in seminary. The air thickened. The twins turned to look at him, slowly, simultaneously, and then they smiled. Not unkindly, not wickedly, just knowingly, as if they'd heard the benediction before, and understood what it cost. He fled the cabin without closing the door, and did not return to the chapel that night. Instead, he went to the edge of the village and stood beneath the bell tower, alone, for hours, watching the ridge as the clouds gathered again, low and dark. When the lightning came, it struck not the trees, but the steeple. The iron bell cracked down its spine, and the cross at its peak fell forward into the mud. From his knees, the preacher looked up, and swore for the briefest moment he saw 2 small silhouettes in the tree line, watching, unblinking, waiting. No one spoke of the steeple. No one asked why the preacher did not return to the pulpit that week. The chapel remained dark, the doors chained. Some said it had been consecrated too late. Others whispered that it had been built on soil already spoken for. The wind changed direction that week. It came down from the ridge, now cold and close, carrying the scent of damp stone and something beneath it, something older than roots. In town, children began to lose their teeth, too early, not from age, not from mischief or accidents. The baby teeth simply loosened, sometimes overnight, sometimes while they slept and fell to the floor without blood, without pain. One girl found 3 on her pillow, another, 6 in a neat little pile beneath her bed. Parents panicked. They boiled water, burned sage, paid the traveling doctor to stay a full week, but no fevers came, no swelling, just gaps where teeth should have been and small, perfect holes beneath the floorboards, as if something had burrowed up. One mother, desperate, pried her child's bed from the floor and tore up the boards beneath. What she found stopped her breath. Beneath the joists, lined like offerings in a forgotten chapel, were dozens of teeth, all different, all child-sized, arranged in a circle. She sealed the room that night, and by morning, her daughter's mouth was empty. Across town, a carpenter named Saul Bishop took it upon himself to investigate the cabin again. He didn't believe in spirits, didn't trust preachers. He carried a hammer, not a Bible. He left at dawn, boots strapped tight and a flask in his pocket. He returned just after dusk, white as linen, silent. In his hands, he carried a scrap of cloth muslin, stained with something pale and sticky. Wrapped inside it, teeth, more than 30, all different shapes, some chipped, some long. He dropped the bundle on the preacher's doorstep and vanished. Into the trees behind the mill. He was never seen again. The preacher opened the cloth at dawn. On his knees, there were 44 teeth inside. 44 small, perfect answers to a question no one dared ask aloud. He didn't bury them. He didn't burn them. He took them to the chapel and placed them in the font. The water turned the color of ash. That night, the twins were seen again, this time in the old schoolhouse, long abandoned, its windows warped and its desks broken by weather and time. They stood at the front of the room, silent, their mouths open, no sound, but the blackboard behind them bore a message, scrawled in wet chalk. It read, "Do you know who you were before you were named?" No one slept that night, not even the dead. People whispered of an hour with no name, a thin sliver of time, between midnight and dawn where breath caught in the chest and sound forgot how to echo. They called it the hollow minute, when the air went still, and those awake felt watch from places that had no doors. It was during such a minute that Rutheny Groves, the gravedigger's daughter, woke to find her bed covered in salt, not spilled, poured, in a ring around her mattress. Her parents swore they'd done nothing, yet their palms bore the telltale itch of contact with raw grain. When they asked Rutheny what she dreamed, she answered simply, "I wasn't asleep, I was listening." To what, she wouldn't say. That same night, in the homes that lined the road toward the ridge, mirrors began to fog over, from the inside, even those polished daily, even those hidden in drawers. When wiped clean, some showed not reflections but glimpses of the cabin, as if the ridge had bent itself into the glass. The same cold window, the same pale figures, watching. Not looking into the homes, looking out, as though the mirrors were their windows, and the people, simply rooms to be peered into. At dawn, the preacher gathered his courage and climbed the ridge one last time. He brought nothing with him. No candle, no salt, not even a prayer. Only resolve, and the memory of what the font water had turned into after the teeth were placed. Inside it, the color of storm ash, the smell of dirt long undisturbed. He reached the cabin. It looked unchanged, weathered, quiet, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt settled, as though the place had claimed what it needed and now slept, full and patient. Still, the preacher knocked, once, twice. On the third knock, the door opened, not wide, not slow, just enough for the smell to escape. Not rot, not mold, but milk, warm, old milk, and something beneath it, something metallic. Inside, the hearth glowed with low, smothered flame, and the twins sat by it, side by side, not watching the fire, watching him. Their eyes did not shine, they did not blink. But they moved, for the first time in months. Together, they reached toward a basin set between them. He had not noticed it at first. Shallow, pewter, filled with water so still it reflected the flame without wavering. As they touched it, a sound bloomed into the air, not from their mouths, from the walls. A humming, but not a song. A reverberation, like something large and low moving beneath the earth. The preacher stepped back. The door closed. He ran, faster than he had in his youth, back down the ridge, into the waking world that now seemed off axis. When he reached the chapel, he collapsed in the vestibule, heart pounding. He never told anyone what he'd seen, but he ordered the bell removed that day, and had the rope buried in the graveyard. Not burned, buried, wrapped in white cloth, marked not with a cross, but with 2 interlocked circles. The preacher had chosen the northernmost edge of the graveyard, past the iron gate, beneath a leaning cedar tree. He dug the pit himself, shallow, hurried, fingers blistered raw. The bell rope, frayed and stained by years of tolling, was wrapped in altar cloth and placed gently into the ground. A quiet interment. No witnesses, no prayer, but the ground did not accept it. By morning, the grave was open, not dug up, peeled, as if the soil had turned away. The cloth lay exposed, spotted with dew. though no frost had touched the grass around it. The preacher returned in silence. He dug deeper, twice as deep, laid the rope inside once more, pressed it flat with both hands, whispering the names of saints he hadn't dared speak in years. He marked the spot with a single stone. The next day, the stone was gone. Only the cloth remained, unwrapped now, the rope coiled into the shape of a cradle. A loop within a loop, 2 rings, side by side. That night, the wind returned. Not from the trees, from the earth. It hummed through the floorboards of homes near the cemetery. Not loud, not shrill, low and steady, like breath exhaled beneath a closed door. The town's animals refused to go near the burial grounds. Cats howled in the corners. Dogs whimpered and clawed at cellar doors. Something had been offered back, but not the same as it had been before. By the end of the week, 3 children had disappeared. No screams, no struggle, just empty beds and open windows. The first was a boy named Silas when 9 years old, a gifted mimic. His mother found his bedsheets neatly folded, a strand of pale hair resting on the pillow. The second was Mail Kin, youngest of 7. Her shoes were still placed beneath the bed, her nightgown still warm. The third was Jonah Reeves. He hadn't been asleep when they came. Neighbors heard him humming, soft, rhythmic, the same pattern Cyrus Bell had once mumbled in his sleep before. The shadows had begun to respond. Jonah's father claimed he saw footprints in the frost. 2 sets, small, side by side, unshaken by wind or thaw. They ended beneath the child's window and never led away. The town changed after that. Doors were bolted twice, windows boarded, cradles burned. Those who could left wagons packed before sunrise, trails swept behind them. But some stayed, some always do. Those who stayed learned to listen, to never speak the names of the missing after sunset, to avoid the ridge entirely, and to never follow the humming no matter how familiar the voice. One old woman, blind since birth, said it best. They aren't boys, they're memory, they're want. They're what gets left behind when something enters this world through sorrow. The preacher did not dispute her. He simply marked a second grave behind the chapel, beside the foundation stone, dug it by hand, left it open, then returned to his study. On the door, he painted a new symbol, 2 circles,